To be completely transparent, I think my heart rate could probably do without two more games of overtime in the Olympics.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the number one sports podcast network. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets and Olympics enthusiast, and welcome to tonight's special episode of Locked On Jets following yesterday's crazy men's hockey tournament. Oh, dear Lord. This is the kind of hockey where, when you're done, you probably need a bit of a cigarette. Not that I encourage smoking, but let's just say the emotional investment, the intensity, the craziness, this is both exactly what we asked for and probably a little more drama than I think any of us was expecting in some of these games. But it should have been obvious from the get-go that, of course, something crazy was going to happen this tournament, right? And what a day of quarters for the men's game that we had. Absolute insanity. I'm sure all of you watching, whether you were rooting for the US or Switzerland or Canada, you could probably do with a day off after just how intense things were. But don't get too comfortable. Gold medal for women's USA versus Canada is later this afternoon, so there is never going to be a dull moment for the next couple of days. Amidst all this, of course, we've also seen some interesting stuff that perhaps the Jets may be talking to Logan Stanley about an extension even bigger than the Olympics, right? 6'7", taller than anyone in the Olympics. What a weird turn of events. But I want to start off with the fun stuff first, right? I want to chat about the Olympics and sort of the craziness that we saw for all of the men's games. We'll dive into that in just a brief moment, but before we do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Well, in the men's tournament, what a day it was, right? The quarters were always going to promise to be very interesting, but I think they confounded pretty much every expectation that I had. There were only a couple of games that I actually kind of got what I expected. You know, in the first one, Slovakia versus Germany, I thought that one was going to be close. I thought it was going to be like a closer to 50-50 split, and instead Slovakia just walked over the Germans. That is a little bit of a shock, I would say. The Germans may not have the most elite depth, but you look at the Slovakian squad and you would have thought, no, Slovakia's got a couple of really good star players and young guys who have been leading the way, but you wouldn't have looked at this team and thought that they were going to absolutely pace the Germans 6-2. That's just not what I think anyone really had in the cards. And Slovakia, for me, amidst all of the men's hockey teams, remains really the story of the tournament. I don't think anyone thought that they would get this far, let alone be this good. They're going to be in an Olympic semifinal, potentially fighting for a medal. No one, I think, really anticipated that. So what a strange turn of events. What a really cool thing to see. And the fact that they could potentially be in the running here for a bronze medal is incredible, right? They might not be able to get past Team USA, but they have a real chance at doing something that I don't know that anyone really expected. I mean, no one looked at this team and thought they would be one of the Final Four nations, but here we are. I mean, they are like one step away from potentially getting an incredible result. Really one of the most impressive testaments to the development of the Slovakian program and their youth track recently, and what a game. But of course, that game resolved pretty one-sided. Everything else from there was absolute heart attack hockey. You had Canada versus Czechia, and like the Czechs always give Canada at every level some sort of trouble, right? But this game, man, wow. Canada definitely had the edge in scoring attempts and everything, but it was close the whole way through. You had both teams scoring some unbelievable pivotal goals. You had Czechia survive, a wide open net from Suzuki, only to give up the game-tying goal that led to overtime just a little bit before the end of the third period. It was chaos. There were some crazy saves. And then, of course, Canada, once you get to overtime, right, it's 10 minutes of 3-on-3 that's just where the Canadian talent is going to shine. The extra space, the extra skill that they've got, it is so hard to match that tempo. And the Czechs, for as much as they did to stay in this game, they survived probably beyond their means. And if they had managed to just come up with one play from Nietzsche, who had a real chance to end it, they could have advanced and knocked Canada out in one of the absolute stunners of the tournament. But Canada lived to fight another day. Josh Morrissey was not in for this game, and I think his presence was sorely missed. Josh, obviously, they're saving for I'm sure the upcoming semis, but they probably could have used him. The back end for the Canadian squad occasionally lacked real pace and passing ability, which, with Parayko really struggling to move the puck, you could tell that Morrissey was desperately missed. So Josh probably sweating bullets watching this game. Somehow Canada survived, and it would not be the only overtime thriller we had. Switzerland was leading against Finland 2-0 last I saw, heading about halfway into the final stretch of the game. And somehow, Finland rallied and ended up coming back to tie it, and then they forced overtime and won. Now, the Swiss, for their part, I thought played a really good tournament. I actually thought that they had a chance at an outside medal. A bronze would really have been, I think, a fair reward for how good they've played this tournament. Finland did have the deeper, better squad. They haven't always played like it, though. So I thought Switzerland really had a chance to come through. Niederreiter scoring his first Olympic goal of the tournament for the Swiss that I thought was going to be, the insurance goal. It wasn't enough, and unfortunately, Nino's tournament comes to an end here in the quarterfinals. Really unfortunate. I thought that Switzerland honestly did deserve to advance, and I'm always rooting for the smaller nations and countries, even with good programs, right? I always want to see them get into these higher seeds. It just makes it so much more interesting. And when you talk about growing the game, seeing these squads that maybe don't have the prestige, don't have the talent, don't have the development budget and resources, still find a way to break through and spotlight some incredible talent. Now, it's not like the Swiss were like some crap squad. They had a really talented team, and I think one that surprised a lot of people. But you look on paper, they were good. So unfortunate that it's come to this point. But I think when you look at who you would probably want to be in a top four, yeah, arguably Finland is a team that I think would give both Canada and the U.S. harder challenges. The U.S. really survived barely against Sweden as well. Really just game after game after game of close shaves. And this one, Connor Hellebuck, I think, did a fantastic job standing tall. The U.S. kind of turtled against Sweden, who have not been good this tournament. They went up 1-0 and then really tried to play with the lead the whole game and just sort of hope that Sweden wouldn't tie it. To Hellebuck's credit, the only goal that he surrendered was when Sweden pulled the goalie, and there was basically an unsavable 6-on-5 absolute one-time blister from Zibanejad that kept Sweden in it. But after that, I would say in overtime, the Swedes never really threatened. And then Quinn Hughes had the game winner for the U.S., probably not the best sign that they are struggling to score more than one goal against one of the worst coached teams in the tournament. Yes, Sweden has a ton of talent, and that should have been a team that was one of the most dangerous in this tournament. But given how Alum, the coach, really performed this tournament, I thought, you'd probably expect to score at least more than one goal against the squad. So the U.S. really feeling like they are just barely scraping by, but I guess given today's events, perhaps not the most shocking. And now it sets up a fascinating upcoming run. We have, not only the women's games later today, but then you've also got the men's playoffs tomorrow. We'll talk about the women's game first, though, because I think this is going to be a really interesting one. Yes, we did have a really bad blowout between Canada and the USA not that long ago, but this is a real chance for the Canadians to reauthor the narrative, and we always know that the gold medal game can go a lot differently than some of the earlier stages. We'll chat about how this could play out in just a brief moment. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena. The crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that part can kind of suck. That's why Gametime has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast, without the hassle. It puts the advantage right back where it belongs, with the fans. For Game Time, I've used it to get Baltimore Ravens playoff tickets. Couldn't be easier. Process was very simple. I always saw upfront pricing. There were no hidden surprise fees or charges. Once you got to checkout, what you see is what you paid. And when I was actually shopping for tickets, they had plenty of zone deals showing me some of the best values in the entire stadium. It got me some great seats. I even had a panoramic seat view so that when I was choosing, I could get the seats that I really wanted. And Game Time had almost instantaneous delivery. It was fast, secure, and again, always coming back with their money back guarantee if things didn't quite pan out. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. And remember, it's gametime.co, not .com. Hey, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network. Thanks for rejoining us as we are chatting a little bit about, the Olympics so far. And today we have not only a rather big game to start for the bronze on the women's side, but you've got an even bigger one, a classic matchup, one that we've seen a lot of the past couple of years in other tournaments and international exhibitions. USA versus Canada. It feels like every time hockey is around, we have some form of USA-Canada for a medal of some level, usually gold. And that's really been the case for the women's side. It just seems to be inevitable destiny, right? And perhaps even on the men's side, we might see the same thing later this tournament. But first, at around 8:40 in the morning, East Coast time, 7:40 for y'all, we'll have Switzerland and Sweden for the bronze. I would say I think Sweden is probably a reasonable favorite for this one. The Swedish women are always very talented. One of the few teams that's really given a squad like the U.S. the past couple of years fits. And, in previous tournaments, even Sweden has come out on top. So, this is going to be a fun game. I would love for the Swiss to actually have a chance to come through. They may not have as much of the talent as some of these other squads, but it would be great to see them get a medal, especially since the men fell short. And it would be cool to see Swiss's hockey program really come away with a big result. But, Sweden, again, probably the odds-on favorite here. Would not shock me if they come away with a pretty sizable win. The big one, though, the big chimichanga, the game that all of us really should be paying attention to and tuning into, this is going to be the women's gold game, right? And this is going to be an intense one. It'll be around 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. your time. Going to be a crazy game. U.S. obviously is massively favored, right? The big difference, though, Canada did not have MPP the last time. They do now. And MPP had a massive difference earlier in this tournament once she was healthy. She actually scored both game-winning goals and broke the scoring record. So this is going to be, I think, a different complexion. And like when you get to the gold medal round, this is usually where things start to tighten up. Teams that maybe looked a little more vulnerable and open will find ways to sort of cover for their deficiencies. We'll see if the Canadians can slow down the U.S. I think that's going to be the biggest storyline of this game. The U.S. is young, fast, and skilled. Canada is certainly skilled, but they're not young nor fast. That's been one of the things that's made a lot of Canada's games a lot closer. And with guys or with women like Murphy and Heise, it's just hard to slow down this United States squad. So this is going to be a really interesting game. I'm actually thinking it's going to be closer than what we had last outing. I could be wrong about that. This tournament has found all sorts of ways to really confound my expectations. But a lot of the games, at least on the men's side, were closer in the last round, and maybe we'll see the same kind of thing happen for the women's gold medal game. But anything can happen. Maybe Canada comes away with a really big chance to sort of reauthor the narrative of this tournament. If they find a way to, survive and upset the U.S., that would be a tremendous victory. It'd stop a recent string of big losses to this U.S. squad. Canada has not really had much to cheer about when it comes to, major accomplishments on the women's side here the past couple of years. I think they need some sort of a real big chance to sort of restart this program, and maybe a big gold medal over the U.S. is exactly what they need to kind of get back to brass tacks. But we'll have to see how that pans out. After that, on Friday, the men will get into their playoff semifinals. The first game we'll have is Canada and Finland. Now, having seen what happened against Czechia, I don't know that I want to say, Canada are comfortable favorites here. They should be on paper. Like, Finland is struggling this tournament, and I think they have not quite been at their absolute best. But they do have the talent to really hurt Canada, especially if, Bennington or, this Canadian defense start to struggle. If Morrissey is in for Canada, I think that changes the complexion of that entire defensive structure on the back end considerably. Josh and Makar, definitely two of the best blue liners on that team. It definitely changes the overall tenor of what you see out of Canada's ability to transition and pass out of the back end. But Finland, maybe not as deep, putting it lightly, right? The top end talent and the depth are not at Canada's level, but they are good enough to be a real problem. And I'm curious to know how Finland will adjust against a Canadian team that has such a tic-tac-toe power play and really just elite depth at every part of this team. I will say that, Canada would probably be wise to move Wilson away from the top six again. He has not really been able to prove that he deserves to be a top level Olympian on this squad. He was brought in to be an enforcer and be that power forward. For the most part, I feel like he's just been more of like a penalty magnet. So probably better to move him into a depth role and shelter him a bit so that, Canada doesn't get itself into trouble. They have a very strong PK, obviously, but you can only ask so much of that before a team like Finland that has guys like Rantanen and Aho really starts to find payday. The last game on Friday will be United States versus Slovakia. This one could be really fun. Slovakia has proven time and time again they are one of the real sleepers of this tournament. And maybe, with Juraj Slafkovsky and some of these other young kids, Simon Nemec, maybe they pull off perhaps one of the shocks in all of this tournament, right? Now, I don't expect that. I think the U.S. is a little too good. I think defensively, the Americans have really tightened up for the most part. And they have limited a lot of some of the most dangerous opportunities. I do think the hockey tends to be a bit on the boring side, comparatively speaking. And once you start getting into the higher level games, the U.S. offense has definitely had some issues finishing. Kyle Connor probably sitting on the bench wondering why he didn't get a chance against Sweden. I think for a lot of that game, he would not have been a particular difference maker. But in overtime, that's probably where you'd have wanted him to have a real chance to turn the tide. When he's got that space and time, he is, one of the most elite scorers out there. But yeah, this will be an interesting one. If the U.S. comes away and, comfortably beats Slovakia, I wonder if that gives them confidence to face a likely rematch with Canada. That would happen on Sunday. Should be a big opportunity for either of these teams, whether it's the U.S., Slovakia, Canada, or Finland, to stake their claim at a major gold medal. I think we all know which matchup is the most likely. We'll probably have Finland and Slovakia fighting for bronze on Saturday. And then on Sunday, Canada, USA, right? All roads seem to be pointing back to that. I would say, for Finland and Slovakia, Finland definitely has the edge, but Slovakia has continued to prove it can hang with the big dogs, and it wouldn't shock me if their young talent leads the way past a Finnish squad that has had some real issues, especially on the back end, kind of holding some of those leads. And offensively, I don't think they've been quite at their best. So could be an interesting bronze game. Gold medal, obviously Canada, USA always seems to go in Canada's favor. But, if that does change this tournament, could be a fascinating result. All I'll say is, for Connor McDavid, man, if he somehow blows a gold medal too, after losing 2 straight Stanley Cup finals, dude, I don't know how you would ever come away from that, right? A lot of athletes go through plenty of failures before they, summit the absolute top of their careers. But man, that has to feel completely crushing. So, hopefully he doesn't have to go through that, but we'll see, right? It's going to be an interesting final couple of games. I'm sure more than a few of us will have some cardiac issues. As always, tune in. We'll have coverage of that tomorrow evening after the men's playoff semifinals wrap up, setting up for what could be one of the most exciting weekends in Olympic hockey history. But it's all coming up. We'll see you later this afternoon, obviously, for USA versus Canada. I'm excited for it. Wishing both teams best of luck. And, we'll see if the Canadian women can rally and put together a really strong performance. Give me your score predictions for that game in the comments below or at my social medias on YouTube or on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. Now, amidst all this, you're probably still riding the high of Olympic hockey. You might not really want to hear the next piece of Winnipeg Jets related news. It concerns Logan Stanley and a possible contract extension. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and one position you have to fill is still sitting vacant. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Sponsored Jobs with Indeed. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for, whether it's skills, experience, or location, all of the above. You're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. You've got to find somebody who really matches everything you need, and that's why Indeed Sponsored Jobs is here to help. Here's a stat that really does say it all. In the minute that I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed according to their worldwide data. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed Sponsored Jobs. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed. Listeners of this show will even get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnWinnipegJets. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnWinnipegJets right now to support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/LockedOnWinnipegJets. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. Hey friends, and welcome back to these closing thoughts on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcasting network. Thanks for sharing this time with us as we recapped a lot of crazy Olympics hockey. Amidst all that, the Jets have been doing some stuff, and one of the things that Ken Wiebe just came out with late last night was that the Jets and Logan Stanley's camp might start talking about contract stuff. Now, before everyone starts panicking, I'm going to choose to read this as procedural first. Everything we've heard so far is that an extension is off the table. So that's how I'm going to treat this, right? Until I really see anything differently, I just don't think a reuniting is really in the cards. I could be wrong about this, but I don't think the Jets are really in a position to where they're planning to extend Stanley long-term. I think he's going to want too much term, too much money. And yes, they do love him, but I also think they're starting to read the tea leaves on where the direction of this team is going forward. And Stanley really does not fit what the Jets need in the long term. The assets that you could probably get from a season where he's had almost 10 goals and is clearly one of the most highly coveted names on the trade market right now, it's too good to ignore. And I think the Jets have already made their moves with Heinola coming up pretty apparent, right? I think that is signaling more of a departure than it is just something where, Logan is likely to come back here. I think that is suggesting Vili's prepared to potentially play some minutes here to close out the season. With Stanley, though, let's just say it does happen, right? An extension 4 or 5 years comes through. I would expect the term to probably be around 3 years. Wouldn't shock me if you start talking about him getting $4.5 million, maybe more than that. I think that's just a mistake, right? You're not wanting to pay your third pairing defender that much. And Logan is right now riding the high of a big shooting percentage burst. I don't know if it's something that he can keep doing in subsequent seasons, but, despite his offensive jump, the defensive impact of his game is still bad enough to where it's going to outweigh a lot of the good that he's doing. Offensively, he is legitimately gifted. There is zero question about that. And had his career gone very differently, I think you had a different kind of player if the Jets had recognized that his shot-first mentality was actually something to encourage early on in his development rather than trying to make him a shutdown defender. He is not a defensive maestro. That's not what he does. He can occasionally lay the body down. He can block shots. He'll do that stuff. But the part of his game that really stands out is when he's skating in possession with the puck. Yeah, he's big and tall, but he has pretty good edge work and pretty good shooting. And especially recently, I think his shot selection has really gotten a lot smarter. He knows some of the better shooting angles. He's been really taking advantage. And I don't think his goal scoring output is necessarily something that's impossible to repeat. I just don't think you should pay for that chance. And I think the Jets need to start changing how this blue line is structured. Get younger, get faster, get more mobile. That is what all the other best contenders out there are doing, and the Jets really would do well to follow suit. You can have size if it skates well consistently and avoids defensive zone pressure. I think the latter portion is where Stanley has really continued to struggle. And it's hard to make anyone on the right side able to compensate for that, right? We really haven't seen anyone who has gotten the best out of Stanley on a consistent basis. So this is where I just don't really think a contract extension makes sense. And the Jets frankly need futures. He is your best shot at getting another first round pick, which is supposedly what the Jets are trying to do. So if the Jets correctly assume that this season's done, they need to kind of think about the future and they need to restructure how this team is built. A Stanley trade makes a lot more sense than an extension. But his camp, I'm sure, is going to go through the usual procedural stuff. I'm sure they're going to have a contract discussion of some sort just to see if the Jets aren't going to be willing to offer them, exactly what they're looking for. So before everyone panics, I would say pump the brakes. Let's give it a little bit and see what happens. I don't really see too many scenarios where an extension does happen, but I think the fact that we're talking about it probably is a sign not the best, not the best news. I don't think that's something that I think a lot of Jets fans who understand where this team is and what it needs really wanted to hear. Winnipeg needs to be making smart choices with the cap space that they've got. They need to make the right choices with where this team is headed and, make sure that you don't tie yourself into contracts that are going to get you in even more trouble than you already are. Winnipeg already has a lot of committed money. They need to be very smart about where they allocate the remainder of their resources going forward. But would love to hear your thoughts on this. Is this, me talking out of my butt? Am I sounding crazy for this? Or do you kind of see the same thing? I think a lot of you already are on the same page. Most of us have generally been very much on the Stanley trade train for a while now. And I think any sort of conversation of a contract extension is likely to get a lot of you riled up and probably pissed off. So for that, I would say let's take a beat, right? See where this goes and revisit this, closer to the trade deadline. I'm not quite ready to anoint this as a likelihood yet, and I still think it is a distant enough possibility to where I'm not going to lose sleep just yet. But we'll keep an eye on it and talk about the Stanley trade or extension as it starts to approach. But for tonight's show, that's going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We'll have some follow-ups from the men's men's semifinals tomorrow and see which of these four teams is going to be uniting again on the weekend for the bronze and gold medal games. But see you then. Have a great night. Thanks so much. Appreciate you and love you. As always, go Jets go.